Hello and welcome to the App Management Experts podcast, where we discuss the latest news, developments, and ideas within the application management space, often inviting industry experts to join the discussions. This podcast is for digital workplace managers, application managers, IT professionals, or anyone with a focus on applications in the enterprise. I'm your host, Bob Kelly, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kieran Mintagi. Between us, we have multiple decades of experience in application and desktop management and have spoken to over 100 enterprise customers about the related challenges. We'll lean on that experience in these sessions to foster interesting discussions, and we're glad you're here to join us. Now, on to today's episode.
Okay, let's get started. This is our first episode of the App Management Experts Roundtable. I'm your host, Bob Kelly, and I've got my friend and colleague, Kieran, here with me. And in this session, or this series rather, we're going to be doing talks just about technology, packaging, app management, trends, new things happening in the market, and hopefully bringing some interesting guests from time to time. And I'm very happy to have with us for our initial series here, Tim Mangan. Tim, great to have you. Can you please do a quick intro for us?
I'm Tim Mangan from TMurgent Technologies. I'm kind of the AppV and MSIX guy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You've written a number of interesting books. I had the pleasure of a forward on a recent one that I thought was really cool. It's a book on application, how applications work. And Tim, I think you have a unique perspective, Tim, because you kind of have a developer background, but you're also like an IT pro. And I don't think a lot of people have both of those perspectives. And I'm sure it comes from your, the AppV, focus that you had.
Yeah, I basically lived, the way I put it, I've lived the last 25 years sort of in between the application and the operating system. It's a very narrow space there. So
yeah, that's what made that book so interesting too, because it was a lot of very developer heavy topics, but written for an admin audience. And so I find it pretty enlightening.
It's an interesting perspective, because when you look at something from a developer point of view, it is engineering. And when you look something from IT pro point of view, it becomes reverse engineering. So you have to think back and forth. And it's difficult to get both of those perspectives. So it's great to have somebody like Tim on the call today. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Yeah, for sure. Like MSIX, obviously, topic that you've been knee deep in for a long time, and we've had our hands in it for quite some time as well. And it seems like the momentum is kicking up, thanks largely in part to your own efforts. And then, so we said, let's talk about it. Let's see where we are, what we're hearing from customers and from the market, what you're hearing, in classes that you're teaching and places that you're speaking. And then the AppV news kind of dropped very recently on top of all this, which really ties things in. First, maybe a quick summary of where things stand for anybody that's not caught up.
Well, for those that may not know, AppV's been around forever. We built the original platform in 2000. Microsoft acquired and renamed it as AppV, and they've been basically giving it away to enterprises for years and years. And it's been on its death throes for a long time. Microsoft has been saying that they're going to deprecate it. It's going to go away. There's no guarantee it's going to go beyond this period. And finally, they got settled on April 2026 as being the last day that they would provide any security support. And it sounded very much like that was it. That was the final, and that customers needed to get off of AppV before that time. And then on the first week of December, they suddenly changed course a little bit. And the way that I have been referring it to people is sort of like AppV has been on death row, and the governor came in at the last minute and put the execution on stay. It's not a commutation of sentence. It's on stay. We believe that because AppV is part of Server 2025 next year, that that comes with a 5-year plus 5+5 policy there, so that AppV should probably be around for a while. But the real driving force for the decision appears to be for Azure AVD, Azure Virtual Desktops. And that's the main reason that decision got made, was that AVD needs apps, and they were seeing customers were struggling getting enough of their apps working in MSIX, which is the only way to get them into AVD at that point. So they need to be able to expand that. And so they took out all the deprecation notices. They're supporting AppV as part of that service now, as well as some other formats. They also announced at the same time. So they're really trying to make a big play to get AVD to be able to get more volume and more customers in there. I believe that's what's driven that answer. And it makes me a little nervous for those that aren't on AVD. So it's not everything that the customer wants. There are going to be no new features, no big fixes out there. It's security updates only for AppV going forward. And I think over time, we're going to see that you need to kind of move off of AppV, but the pressure's off.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to play it, Microsoft's part. Because they're not saying that MSIX is not a replacement for AppV anymore. They're just taking their foot off the gas, I guess, and saying no rush, which is an odd approach.
Yeah, that was my question. I think you kind of answered, Tim, that I was wondering if they're keeping it alive, then maybe they'll keep adding enhancements or improvements, but it's clear they're not going to. Now that makes me think with so many technology improvements, there is a new version of .NET Framework, a lot of other things. So as in how you go in the future and you build apps on these modern technologies, how do you think they would be compatible for AppV? I know it's good today, but as we go in the future, we're talking about next 5 years.
Well, it's good today, but I've already started to see some of the newer applications out there, and there starts to be challenges in getting them properly deployed through AppV. So over time, that high level, that I normally see, high level of compatibility for applications with AppV, that's going to start to drop down.
So that should be like a warning for enterprises who are in middle between MSIX and AppV, and they're at a point where they want to decide, okay, with this announcement, do I want to continue with AppV or should I move to MSIX? What do you think would be the right path for them?
My take is that you should be starting that motion, that you eventually are going to need to make that move. You're going to eventually we'll hit that tipping point. I mean, we're getting better with MSIX every year. If AppV starts to drop down, we're going to reach that point. I reached a point in October, which was before Microsoft made this announcement, that said that I think MSIX is now ready to be your first choice going forward, that an enterprise can very easily make that decision. I want to go MSIX first. And then for those that don't work, I'll have to do something else with those applications. With this announcement, I think I don't really change that. I think MSIX is ready for that. And I think if you're ready to be making those moves, then you should be doing that. If maybe you have other things that you have to do this year, like maybe complete that Windows 10 to Windows 11 migration, well, yeah, you probably should be focusing on that first. Yeah. But eventually, yeah, you're going to want to kind of go there. I see Bob has put up the chart that I provided there. This is showing how I measure the application compatibility, right, between the two technologies. And this is what I usually, whenever I show numbers like this, I like to explain. This is my high fidelity model, which says that what you see there in green is something that if you deployed the native application from that EXE or MSI installer, and you gave the end user this package, could they tell the difference? And if the answer is no, then we give it that green color. That may be a little different than numbers you hear from the vendors directly that are supporting these technologies. There usually it's more of a smoke test. Hey, if I launch the app and it works, it's compatible. And there's often little things that may be very important to the user that are missing in that application. So this is that high fidelity model. And traditional number for for AppV, quite frankly, is 98%. This is the number there was from my report card that I produce each year in January, report card for MSIX. And the number dropped down this year, but it actually dropped down in part because of what I just mentioned, that we're starting to see a little bit of a rot in there with some of the newer apps. But quite frankly, I added a whole bunch of applications into the mix this year, and I only gave AppV one shot. I didn't try to troubleshoot any of them. So the number dropped down to 91%. It's probably more like 95%, I think would have been the realistic number if I'd spent the time. And then, we had the 82% for MSIX. Again, this was last January. My preliminary numbers for next year's report I ran last month, and it looks like we'll be at 90% with MSIX this year. So we're continuing to move that bar forward each year as we move along.
Your testing is an interesting thing to maybe touch on for a second, because you're not just taking 10 random applications. You've found things that will be difficult to stress the system, as well as some things that can work. So how representative of a typical environment, with the feedback that you've gotten, is this fair, or are you making the test pretty hard?
I'm making the test pretty hard. This is the full criteria of what people would want. I mean, you've got there's 115 apps in this year's test set right now. I don't know if I'm going to add any more before the end of the year, but right now that's it. But it's got 2 or 3 versions of AutoCAD in there. It's got SolidWorks. It's got TechSmith's Snagit program, which is just a nightmare in itself, right? So a lot of apps that I have seen from my work and training customers on how to do the packaging. So a good sample of the apps that they have, as well as some custom things that I made myself, applications specifically to test different parts of the technology, so we would know that this particular area is working or not.
Yeah, because a lot of times the applications that people are trying to package and deploy in the enterprise are in-house applications that are no longer really being supported, or old legacy applications that may not have licenses for, or they've gone end of life, but they're still being used. Those are the nightmare packages, right? But for the most part, new applications, if you're getting the latest version of something to get the most secure version and it's available and supported, then your success rate on both parts should be relatively high. Yeah. We're really the podcast here is really meant to be more technology focused and not product. But at Juriba, we are working on kind of automation as a challenge, and coming up with ways to automate everything that is automatable when it comes to the whole packaging process. And that includes testing. And of course, for MSIX, that has to include PSF because it's just needed so frequently. Here's another kind of slide that I think you shared that helps illustrate this.
Yeah. So, as I look at the applications, there's some applications that are they're good apps. You can package them up every way to Sunday and they're going to be fine. Then there are these applications, and these numbers here are specifically from my testing with MSIX and where we need the PSF. We can take a look at what's in that application and understand what is going to be needed in terms of the PSF to be able to get that application to work inside the MSIX container. And that can be automated, right? So we can just look at it and say, okay, yep, here are the things that we need to do. And that covers about 70% of the applications out there that I see, right? That we can just take a look at it, and they're fit for some type of automation so that someone can say, hey, I need this application or I need this new version, and you can very rapidly get an app and it's going to be good, right? We got that next set where we really need some human input into that. Someone needs to look at it, troubleshoot it, and say, oh, okay, that didn't work with just the straight up default fixes from the PSF. We need to do something special here. And we have things that we can do there. And that can get us to that 90% number today. And then, beyond that, it's, there's nobody I don't think they can get those apps to work right now. And that's something that'll, we're going to continue to shrink that number down, but that is where the technology is.
And hopefully you're just lucky enough not to have too many of those need Superman quality apps. Yeah. This lines up pretty well with the numbers that we've been seeing around automation, because everybody says automate packaging. That's kind of crazy, but if you're also automating the testing for it and getting some high fidelity results back, then you can be confident that you have successfully automated something without a terrible amount of work. And with all the command line support today, and like I said, the more modern new applications doing things the way we hope they would more frequently, we do get, it looks like about 70% of applications can be hands-off automated. So this aligns with that. And our message too isn't that we can automate everything. We're trying to automate everything, but we know it's a goal that we'll never get to. And so there is always going to be a need for packaging expertise and people that can sit down and get into this understanding.
What I love about the approach that Juriba is taking is, I view much of your work as being sort of upstream from the work that I do of actually worrying out getting the package created. And you're helping the enterprise reduce all of the friction that takes place to get to the point that someone's actually doing a package, so that as things change and you want to move, it doesn't take 6 months to get to the point that there's a packager actually taking a look at a package. You can do that rapidly. And for the ones that you can automate, great. Now you really sped up the services that you're providing the end customers within your organization of these applications, helping them modernize and get moving faster, getting rid of the security vulnerabilities that may exist in some of these apps. And then IT can really focus on, okay, here are the ones that really need some help.
Exactly. And where we're zooming in now is articulating those that need expertise, why we think that's the case. So that even more helps. So when they sit down to work on something, they've got a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. And I really feel like some of that lines up with the conversation you were opening, talked about the application book that I wrote and understanding that. And that's part of what I've been trying to do with packages, is use that as the packaging as an opportunity to pull out the information that someone who needs to do that UAT test can really understand, well, what should be involved in that test for this app, right? What should I be looking for? And understanding what the application intended initially when it installed is part of that information.
You said you put applications like AutoCAD and SolidWorks through your testing, and you're able to get MSIX successfully. That seems very
I know, I did not say that part. I said they were in the mix.
Okay, they were in the mix. All right.
They're in that bright yellow column.
Sure. I was coming to a point of PSF fixups. I was trying to understand from you, how often have you seen that a PSF fixup is required to make an MSIX work to meet your UAT or your tests? And second part of that question is, I know there are a few that are released by Microsoft within that library, and I know you contributed a few. So I'm curious to know, which are those common ones that you found during your testing. These are the ones that are commonly found PSF fixups by these apps.
Well, there's the numbers I have aren't exactly the question you asked, because what you asked is what needs the PSF. Instead, what I have a tendency to do is to look for any possible reason that I could use the PSF to fix something in this application, and I add it to it. So I'm adding the PSF into the vast majority of these applications. Now, within the MSIX framework, particularly as the AppX manifest itself has expanded over the years, there's sometimes newer options. To give you an example of that, we have a fixup called the dynamic library fixup. Because of some of the things that MSIX does, sometimes the application can't find its own DLLs because it's a different kind of environment. And so the dynamic library fixup, which is part of the PSF, attempts to solve that problem. And if the problem exists, it solves it for 98% of applications that are out there. But there are a few applications we've found that make calls to load those DLLs in a very unusual way. And the fixup doesn't trap those because they don't call through the normal mechanism to load the DLL in. And so we have to fix those problems another way. There is another feature that Microsoft has added called the loader search order, which is an entry in the manifest that says, oh, here's some additional folders that you should look for DLLs in. That's a different way of solving the problem. My solution has been traditionally to recognize I probably need it and add that dynamic DLL fixup in it. But now I'm also doing loader search order. I could possibly always do it with loader search order, except that Microsoft put a limit to only 5 directories in that list. And there's a lot of applications that have more than 5. So we kind of need both. And so my default tends to be I put the PSF in if I think I might possibly need it because it's probably not going to hurt. And then fall back to these other methods as I need them.
And that's your general approach too, right? To look and see, okay, there's an INI file, an XML file. These might need to be written to. There's,
they might, and maybe they're not going to be written to, but if I see them in there, I say, yep, I'm going to add the file-based fixup so that if the app wants to write to it, it will be able to, because that's what it's used to being able to do.
Now, the one specifically, the dynamic library fixup seems very technical for somebody who comes from an IT pro background. That seems like a very developer skill to identify those things. I know your tool does a great job simplifying all of that, but what would be your suggestion or your guidance for somebody who tries to look for issues in MSIX, runtime issues, and then figure out, hey, these are the ones that I want to apply, versus your approach where let me apply everything up front and ensure what I get is a good one?
Yeah. So that kind of goes back to the way that we originally figured out these applications, right? And so we would start out, for example, looking at applications that need some help for the registry, right? And so you would containerize the application, you'd test it, you'd run process monitor against that, and you'd see that there are instances where the application is trying to gain read-write access or maybe full access is the term that you'd see in there. And they get an access denied, and they're trying to do something which under HT current user, they're trying to open up something to get at a key, and they're getting access denied. And that would never happen natively. So that's the kind of thing that we'd look for and then say, oh, okay, we need the registry fix up on this one because it has that particular type of problem. Right.
Identify such. I know there is trace fix up. So do you think that would be helpful to identify such things? Because all of that could be possibly in the logs, in the event logs, where I may not be able to easily identify that, hey, this is related to this app's, this call.
Yeah. So what Karen's referring to there is we have a piece of the PSF that's called the trace fixup, which is something that we would inject into the package for the purpose of doing monitoring. And in the early days with the MSIX, that is how we did all of our debugging. We used that because it's actually tracing exactly what the application asked for and exactly what the application got back. Something like process monitor is running at a lower layer of their operating system, which means the MSIX container has already made changes to what the application asked for, or maybe even prevented that request from even getting down to the level of process monitor, so we would miss some things. Over time, we've gotten better at understanding what we need to know, and we don't use the trace fixup very often anymore. It's still there, and that would be a way to get started. There's even a little GUI monitor piece we put in there to give you a process monitor-like look at that. And it is nice that it's very close to the application. But I think at this point, I usually, if I need to debug, I'm just going straight to process monitor and seeing what's there. And it does take a little experience to get used to doing that. There's often much more to look at than it would have been with the native application. But it seems to be the most effective way to be able to do that job these days.
Knowing that your MSIX package works is a tricky one. You mentioned some people's tests might just do a smoke where it's launching the application, make sure it runs. A lot of these things that are fix-up related may not occur until you're stressing the application, do something with it, which really drives more need for functional testing or user acceptance testing than normal. Do you think it becomes necessary to functionally test everything, or because that's really going to slow things down if that's the guidance from MSIX.
It all needs to get tested eventually. It's a question of where you want to spend that effort, right? What I've been trying to do is kind of get that information out there. Like on this form here, there's that view report button. And if they click on that, it'll show them, okay, this application had 4 shortcuts, and here's what they were. It has some file associations. There is a shell extension for a context menu. There is a drag and drop handler shell extension. And that's where a user would be taking a file and dropping it somewhere. And that's associated with this particular file type. And that at least provides the information. Okay, so maybe in my smoke test, I want to make sure that I've got the shortcuts I want. That's pretty standard that anyone would be doing. I'm going to launch some things and see if it comes up. Well, I got these file associations. Maybe I ought to find one of those files and make sure that I can open it from the file and that works, right? And then the drag and drop handler, well, maybe I just leave that to the end user because probably very few use it, but hopefully whoever my application expert is that goes through the process of approving this application when I've finished my packaging, they'll run that test if they think it's important. But every organization is going to have to figure out where they want to put that effort, right? But eventually you want to make sure that the things are being tested before the application hits a lot of end users, and you have one of those IT fires that you have to put out.
Yeah, I agree. I think it used to be there was a lot of product testing, right? We'd identify and correct problems before any testing was even done. And that took a lot of time. And as Windows compatibility got better and better, it made less and less sense to do that upfront work. And so this could be a similar situation. There might be some applications that lend themselves to trouble that you're going to give extra attention to, but the majority are okay. And so to wait until deployment testing to see if the application's working might make more sense than ahead of that, because you're already going to do that deployment test and launch it and do some work.
And that's part of what just going to one of these package formats, whether we're talking about AppV or MSIX or even some of the others, the danger that we always had with MSI repackaging was the fact that you could take that package and drop it on the system. It could break something else on the system. And we kind of eliminate that by going to these new, more modern formats, which is really a good thing. And taking out that level of risk and allowing us to focus on what's important to the end user.
Yeah, for sure. I think the automation bit that we can use your tool, and we do with our integration. We use that command line to apply all the fixups that make sense. And then we throw it to a smoke test because that's what we can automate right now. And then you kind of get your, okay, this looks good. You can put it through a UAT, you can deploy it to pilot and check it out there. But yeah, it needs that extra sanity check before it goes out to the masses. But the ability to use AI for this type of thing seems very close. So I don't know if you saw, but we recently posted a demo where we've got an AI agent doing a repackaging job. So it takes FileZilla, I think it is, and we tell it install the application. Don't put a shortcut on the desktop and don't launch it at the end. So that's like the instruction or the prompt. And it goes through and you can see what it's thinking at the bottom of the video. It's basically, it does a screenshot, it interprets it, and then it sends back to our client, click in these coordinates to check this box or to press this button. And so it goes through the whole install. And that use case is very simple because an installation wizard is very simple to understand. But I can see in the very near future, you should be able to say, functionally test this application. And just like you would look at an application and know the things it does pretty intuitively to be able to play around with it, you wouldn't necessarily need to be an expert on the application to identify a problem with it. So I think we'll get there pretty soon, like maybe sooner than people were expecting. but that would certainly be a great way to solve the problem of functional testing at mass.
So does that mean your packager needs to learn prompt engineering skills?
Prompt engineering, yeah. I love that term, prompt engineer. No, actually, the hope is that we cover that. But for UAT testing, we're still kind of brainstorming the right way to go about it. We have a capability right now where we suggest command lines to packagers. If you're not a packager, we have a simpler interface that doesn't show this complexity. But if you're a packager, you can see here are the command lines that might work, where they came from, success rates if they've been smoke tested. So we can really help you pick the right command line for install and uninstall. I could see us getting to a similar place with prompts. So maybe for this application, these 3 or 4 prompts make sense to make part of your test, and you could have those recommended to you.
So when you're talking with your customers, are you hearing them? How do they react to the idea of using AI for this?
A lot of people didn't trust it because, for running through an installation, there's some security concern that you're giving AI control of the system. But this is a test system in a test environment. It's just running this application. It's not doing anything, of consequence. And of course, you can see it. We have a complete log of everything that happens, and you control it. So it's not too risky there. But I think a lot of people's initial feeling about AI is skepticism, because they've gone to ChatGPT and said, what's the command line for this? And they've gotten some hallucinated, completely made up thing that doesn't work. So actually the way we've implemented it for command line suggestions is we have our own rich knowledge base as the most, likely best source of information. Then we also, so there could be multiple good entries there. Then we do a programmatic analysis and say, okay, programmatically, these are the command lines that seem appropriate, because some of them might be customizations and you may or may not want them. So there could be a number to select from. But the AI suggestion, we've actually demoted to the bottom of that recommendation list, because it's definitely better than nothing when you can't get much, but you generally wouldn't want to rely on it at this stage. But some systems are better than others. Ours is set up in a way that we can leverage multiple systems, and we're seeing some AI service providers are good for this and others for that.
We're really concerned about the harvesting aspect of that. I didn't hear you mention that as a concern at all. Are we kind of over that?
I think it depends on what you're asking.
Okay.
If you're working on a sensitive presentation, you're giving it a lot of information about your company and your product and your direction. That is concerning. But I see it getting used quite a bit. There was a lot of warnings early on. Don't ask sensitive questions. Don't use it. Because there is concern that you could be training it on things you don't want public. But knowing that, there's been a lot of security put into these systems, so you have control if you trust the vendor you're working with. But for command line stuff and running installers and testing applications, that's not proprietary or sensitive information.
It's one of the things that I was talking with customers is like, how much trust are you going to give how many companies? You got to trust Microsoft because you really don't have a choice, right? And maybe you're on another cloud provider, so you got to be trusting them. But every one of these applications that you're putting on your systems, you got some type of trust relationship with that vendor. And how do you actually deal with it? And I think for a long, long time, we've just been walking around with blinders on it. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. It's just, oh, that's not a problem. And so security is everybody's job. And we do have these relationships. We need to recognize them, and we need to manage them the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I see a lot of policy around, use of AI for that reason. And Microsoft's obviously in a good position with Copilot being built in and them having their own security. But then there was a lot of concern about that feature they had where they're basically screenshotting your screen
Yeah.
for text and storing it in a readable way. That was a cause for alarm. They had to put the brakes on that one. So there's definitely concern. And that's the good thing. There's a lot of people that are concerned speaking up. So I think everybody can kind of go in.
You know, we kind of saw a little of this with, as we started moving to the cloud, the whole data sovereignty thing, right? That, I got to make sure that I know where my data is in terms of geographic boundaries and all that. And spent a lot of energy and time and money just making sure that was in place, and then immediately go out and then, buy a company that's not within that geography. And well, what do you do now? Oh, I guess we really didn't need to do all that. Right.
Yeah. So we haven't come up on a lot of companies that still have AppV. I think given your focus, you'd be exposed to the majority of them. What's what you're hearing from people that are on AppV? They've obviously been thinking about the MSIX move and are now, maybe.
Well, all of the customers that I've been dealing with have been in that migration mode. But I know that there's a lot of customers out there that weren't yet in that migration mode, and so they weren't talking to me. So it'll be interesting to see how much those folks engage and how aggressive they want to be moving forward. Again, my advice is they can't ignore it. The problems are going to be there eventually.
Yeah, enterprises move slow, right? It's just like a Windows EOL or anything. Everybody, there's way too many people waiting till the last minute or past that last minute.
Yep.
Have you seen any new vendors coming up with their products in the MSIX format? I know that there are really few, but in the recent, in a year or two.
There are a number that are out there, and it may not. What I'm actually seeing is, it's not the products you already have that are coming out in that format. It's new stuff. Microsoft has actually done a surprisingly large amount of stuff within their own portfolio for the small stuff that you don't even notice that's there, right? The big one they did was Teams. The new Outlook is in that format. But the new Outlook is one that, quite frankly, they did so much else at the same time that is something like, I tell my wife, don't turn on the new Outlook. You're going to hate it. Stay with the old one. Because there's some loss of functionality that happened because it was really a total rewrite to make it more cloud friendly. But gosh, I don't want to use that in a disconnected mode. That's horrible. She'll go to the library with her laptop to do work, and suddenly all her documents are gone. That's not a good thing.
Really the hope, though, right? That the vendors like this, the biggest advantage over AppV was this is an ISV ready format that we
anything that the vendor is doing that they're writing as a new application today, they're no longer writing. Well, they are some, but they're largely not writing in .NET framework or the old Win32 stuff. They're writing in .NET 6, 7, 8, 9 now. And those are natively a package format. They also have an unpackaged form, but given the fact that they wrote it in those, it's inherently packageable. So even if the vendor didn't actually come out in the MSIX format, that is something that is so easy to package up because it's already built to run in that package. And some of the compatibility things that we have to fight with the PSF shouldn't apply anywhere near as often with that type of software. And those are the ones that I'm worried about for things like AppV going forward, that AppV won't be able to handle some of those as well.
Well, there should be some pressure that MSIX has an advantage to encourage that movement sooner, but so maybe that it'll be that way intentionally.
And what Microsoft's been doing with the operating system is from a security perspective, something that they've needed to do. Like we talked about shell extensions earlier, right? Shell extensions traditionally ran inside the Explorer process that ran your desktop. So any vendor that dropped down a shell extension, that was loaded into that memory space and it was active. And that's a big security right there. And so they've been quietly behind the scenes in the new versions of the operating system, splitting these things out. So things like preview hosts have their own process. Some of those other shell extensions end up in some of those massive numbers of SVC hosts you see in the task list these days. I mean, Windows 7, you had, maybe a dozen of those. Now, just logging in, you probably have 30 of them on your system. And that's that separation to try to improve the security posture of the operating system. And these package formats for MSIX are taking advantage of that and applying things in a way that you get that type of separation. Whereas MSI and AppV are continuing to do these things the old ways, and you're not getting that improved security posture as a result.
I remember early on, that was one of the benefits of MSIX that they were pushing, is on Windows 11, while you can still run other applications, if they were packaged with MSIX on Windows 11, that they would be inherently more secure. So, and people do care about that, but the complexity, the unfamiliarity of the format, like people expect to see a setup.exe, right? Which, have you seen like Bootstrap? Because you'd see that a lot of times in the beginning before people knew what MSI was. It would be a setup.exe with the MSI inside so that people got what they expected. I haven't seen anybody do that with MSIX. Have you? Kind of a bootstrapped MSIX?
Oh, no, I don't think I've seen anybody do anything like that. Yeah. I'm sorry. There is an exception. There was one. The guy who writes Notepad++.
Yeah.
I think he's already taken this out, but he had a version where the context menu was actually an MSIX package, so that you installed the native application and it installed an MSIX context menu.
Wow.
To get it. It was weird.
You still, that's the thing, right? You look at enough applications, you'll find the
somebody
weird
does something weird
happening. Yeah.
You said that version is discontinued now, or is it still there?
He took it out in the next version, I think. Yeah. It definitely caused me a headache in trying to repackage that as an MSIX app, because it had MSIX apps in it
already. Yeah. So there are definitely a lot of positive things happening in the direction of MSIX, but when we have conversation with our customers, with enterprises, I still see they're very skeptical about moving to MSIX. They still, we've hardly spoken to anybody who say we have MSIX packages in production. They're mostly, we are testing, it's in dev or QA staging, whatever. So what do you see are like common reasons that enterprises have not to move to MSIX? One thing that we hear is, we want to see more vendors coming out with MSIX, so we have more confidence on the package format. But beyond that, with respect to, hey, these are some limitations in MSIX, which is stopping me because these functionalities are part of my core packages like MSI or EXE, and those are not supported by MSIX. I know they're doing better. I mean, when they started, they didn't have support for drivers. I think in some way they brought it, and they're also continuously making some improvements. But at this point, what do you think what do you think about such limitations which are holding back enterprises?
I think it's something that I think as we've improved our capabilities, it's something that they probably need to go back and look at. I think there are a lot of companies that went and looked at it in the early days and said, wow, this is really hard. But I've worked with some customers that started in the early days, and they've had tremendous success. Customer in Portugal, 700 applications, and they're almost completely in MSIX now because they've been working at it. They got the easy ones first, and they had to learn a bit on how to deal with the hard ones. But once they got that under their belt, they were able to be very successful in their ability to deploy those things out in production.
What I see is it's kind of an all or nothing with, right? Like, I can't have everything in MSIX, and I don't want to go there, and that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. There is no single format that's going to fit for all of your applications and in all of the different ways that you want to deploy those applications. Even the ubiquitous MSI, it does not work in the non-persistent VDI or the RDS world very well. So you're going to have to end up with a mixture of ways that you deploy these applications, and you try to find the best fit. You're probably going to end up somehow with a first choice. This is what I'm going to do. If I got a brand new app and I don't know anything about it, I'm going to go with this path first. And when I run into resistance, then I'll go to another.
If you try the MSIX and it works easily, then you're done.
Yeah.
And if not, you've got your...
That's the approach that I would recommend, but I know that there's a lot of customers out there that they're not going to go that route first. They're going to go with something else first. And maybe they'll end up backing into MSIX when they can't get it to work any other way.
Yeah, change is hard. And I think marketing-wise, referring to it as a modern package format, modernization was like, oh yeah, I want that.
Yeah. That's free, right? That's free, right? I get modern for free.
But there are some benefits to MSIX that you don't hear touted very much. I mean, obviously, app attach is a powerful use case that's gotten it some good attention. The clean install and uninstall, it is a benefit, but it's almost frustratingly a benefit. Like that shouldn't be that big a deal. But there are some good things around application updates. It's a single instance store. You don't have to shut the application down. There should never be a need to reboot or anything. You can install it in place. You can install just the files needed, just parts of the files needed. So it's very efficient. But I really don't hear anybody talking about updates. Is that kind of something that you dive into when you're in your class? How to update and control the updates?
Yeah, we do. Particularly as we're talking about things like applications with plugins. And I think the story there with MSIX is just so fantastic because you package up the plugin for that application. And now when the application changes, you don't have to touch that plugin package. And that's really cool. With AppV, we had to worry about that stuff. But here we don't. You just bring in the new version and the plugin, unless there is a, compatibility change that the vendor made in that, for that app and that version, and they had to throw away all the plugins. So, that plugin is just going to work without you touching it. You just update the app and boom, it's gone. You don't have to worry about
it. And modification package too is another interesting one, right? Because for an MSI, every time you get a new MSI, you need to create a new transform for that thing. And
then this becomes your transform. It's as well as the container for your pre-configuration for the app. So this is where your settings to disable the auto updater, for example, something enterprises typically want to do. That would be, you can contain that in that modification package. And now the new vendor package can just come on down and you don't have to change any of that stuff. And that's really cool. I don't see enterprises leveraging that piece as much as they probably should be going forward.
One such benefit is signatures as well. Well, it depends on how you see it. It offers great security, but we have generally seen IT pros are not very used to signing something. They might not have that knowledge, so it might look like an overhead step for them. So
it's a big blocker for folks to get in MSIX. And it's really one of those silly ones, because once you spend a day to get over that problem, it's no longer an issue. It's just like it's something that happens in the process. And oh yeah, right, we have a certificate there.
So considering all these works, it looks like if you're taking that approach, moving or migrating towards MSIX, and you want to look at automation, then you want all of this to be part of your automation workflow, signing, upfront PSFs. So that might make or reduce your time to get the package ready than thinking about, okay, let me first create MSIX. Now let me try to figure out what PSFs are required, which might take ridiculous amount of time and a lot of skill. So you might rather want to take the approach that you take, Tim, that I want to first apply the fixups and let the package work and be reactive if something fails. You think that would be a good approach for?
I think that's a great approach. I think it's kind of turning the packaging process for that 70% of apps that we talked about as being just sort of an automatic, thing. Someone thinks, oh, I want a package, and then boom, I've got a package. And does it look like this is in the 70%? Great. Let's move on. And then, when it's not, then okay, now I need to bring in an expert within my organization that knows how to deal with the problem packages. And yeah, you got to spend a little time getting that person trained up so that they can be effective at it. But over time, they'll be as effective as that as they can for any type of packaging.
Mm-hmm. And that mindset, I think, is a game changer too, because it's very common for enterprises to only manage certain applications. Like they don't try to create and test a package for everything, only if it's on at least 10 machines or only if it's by this set of vendors. And so they're consciously taking, we're going to close our eyes and not look in this direction at, what could be hundreds of applications that fall into that criteria. So to look at an inventory and see, okay, there are, 200 applications that we probably should get under management, but we don't have the resources. If you can take this more automated approach and only focus on the 30% that are necessary, then hopefully that existing team could actually take on a lot more because they're not wasting their time with all this.
And I think it's becoming more and more important for organizations to take that type of approach because of the benefit we see. We didn't talk about with MSIX is that isolation piece, and we get it with AppV as well. But not all of the packaging formats have that. And that isolation piece is really important because all of these applications they're being built on frameworks that themselves, even if the vendor is absolutely perfect in every line of code that they write, they're based on these frameworks that themselves have CVEs every single month. And so by getting this isolation that comes in, it's not a perfect solution. I remember in the early days of AppV back in Softricity, our marketing guy wanted to refer, we called the AppV the bubble. He wanted to refer to it as the condom. And we said, no. We said no for other reasons. The idea that we're providing protection is not the point. The idea, though, is that if you are running inside that isolation, the odds of worse things happening because that app did get attacked because of that vulnerability that's maybe in the app, maybe it's in the dependency that they build into the app, the odds of that getting exposure beyond the container itself is reduced. And so you're better off than just putting those things out completely unmanaged and, hoping that nothing bad ever happens.
All right, Tim. I think we're up on our time, but this was a great conversation. Thanks again for joining us. I hope we can have you back again sometime in the future.
Great. It was very enjoyable being here.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this latest episode of the App Management Experts podcast. To hear more, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or at Juriba.com. I also encourage you to follow Juriba on LinkedIn to keep up with other recordings and articles we're publishing. See you next time.